Now in Chapter 3, Section 4, Lesson 4, we're talking about multiplying rational numbers, where the last lesson was subtraction and the lesson before that was addition. Now we're talking about multiplying rational numbers. And again, rational numbers are fractions, they're decimals, they're any number, terminating decimals, any number that can be specifically located on a number line. So what they're going to be talking about here is multiplying rational numbers with different signs. And they're showing you the rules for signs, a positive and a negative. When multiplied together, gets you a negative. When you multiply a negative and a positive, you're going to end up with a negative number. So here they have 4 times 1/2. If you know that 4 times 1/2 is 2, then it's really just a matter of remembering a positive times a negative is going to equal a negative. Cool? So that's kind of what we want to make sure we're paying attention to. As far as multiplying 4 times 1/2, one thing that I like to do is write 4 as a fraction so that you can multiply that number times a fraction, and then you multiply across. When you're multiplying fractions, you multiply across, and then you simplify. 4 divided by 2 is 2. You know, 2 goes into 4, 2 goes into 1, you end up with 2 over 1, which is 2. Okay, so this is stuff that we learn in 4th and 5th grade with multiplying fractions. So if this is something that you need a refresher on, definitely ask your teacher for some review. Visit your 4th and 5th grade teachers for examples from their textbooks. It's not that you don't know how to, it's just might have been some time since you've done this. So definitely want to refresh your memory on how to multiply fractions. But essentially, all this is focusing on is remembering that a positive times a positive is a positive, and a negative times a negative is a positive. If they're the same sign, you're going to be positive as a product when you multiply. So here, they have decimals, not fractions. So if we were to multiply this in the traditional format, we might take 3.5 times 2, and we end up with 7.0. All right? But then, the thing we have to remember, all right, these sign rules, a positive times a negative is a negative. So they're showing you on a number line that 3.5 and 3.5, two groups of negative 3.5 is going to end up at -7. That's what they're showing you here. So you will need to understand how to do that. All right? The next page has you multiplying more than 2 rational numbers. Now this is where it can get a little tricky, because if you have a negative times a negative, you get a positive, right? A negative times a negative gives you a positive. But the problem there is once you have that positive, you're going to be multiplying that positive times a negative, and you're going to end up with a negative. All right? So when you have more than 2 rational numbers that you're working with, the number of signs definitely matters. All right? So again, a negative and a negative gives you a positive. And then once you have that positive, a positive times a negative, it's going to be get you a negative. All right? So that's what we want to make sure we pay attention to, is keeping track of the numbers we're working with. And in order to practice that, we actually have to use these examples and not just do them, but show somebody how we did them. How did you solve it? You know, I mean, use a number line to find each product. 5 groups of -2/3. This number line is broken into thirds, 1, 2, 3, all right? So this is -3/3, because -1/3, -2/3, -3/3. And if you have 5 groups of -2/3, then you have 2/3, okay? 2/3, all right? 2/3, good. 2/3, fine. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 groups of 2/3, and here's the last one. We end up right here, and this is -3 and 1/3. All right, 3 and 1/3. So we used a number line to show 5 groups of -2/3. Now, if we were to multiply this, we might say 5/1 times -2/3, multiply across, which is 5 times -2 is -10, over 1 times 3 is 3. 3 goes, let's see here, -10/3. This is a improper fraction. If we were to simplify this, then 3 goes in the 10 3 times with 1 left over. So we end up with 3 with 1 left over. So we end up with the same thing even when we do it in this more algebraic way. So again, just practicing talking through how we know the answers we're getting are accurate. If you get the right answer and you say, I don't know how I got it, it just is, that's not good enough. That doesn't mean you've learned it, all right? That just means you have memorized some trick that later, in later grade levels, might not be a trick you can use anymore, all right? So please make sure you are explaining how to solve these problems in ways that make sense to other people. And that is it.